I stood in our kitchen, my kitchen now, staring at the half-empty bottle of cabernet I'd opened 3 hours ago. David's message still glowed on my phone. Working late again. Don't wait up. The 3rd time this week. The 12th time this month. I didn't need forensic accounting skills to see the pattern, though ironically, that's exactly what I did for a living. The clock on the microwave blinked 11:38 p.m. I swirled the dark liquid in my glass, watching it catch the pendant lights I'd installed last summer while David was at a business conference in San Diego, the same conference his secretary Jennifer had mysteriously needed to attend. I should have known then. Maybe I did. I set down my glass with deliberate care. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Rebecca, a woman who loses her composure, loses twice. I'd maintained my composure for 18 months of suspicious late nights, weekend emergencies, and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume. Tonight would be no different, even as the weight of certainty settled over me like a funeral shroud. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared cell phone account. Technology makes betrayal so much easier to track these days. 3 hours of calls to Jennifer's number today alone, text messages throughout the day, mysteriously absent from the phone he'd left charging on the counter before his shower this morning. Deleted, but not from the carrier records. I tapped a perfectly manicured nail against the granite countertop. 10 years of marriage reduced to data points on a spreadsheet of deception. The elegant wedding in the Catskills, the charming tutor in Westchester County, the European vacations, the whispered promises of children when the time was right. All of it digitized into evidence of a life unraveling. I closed the laptop. 10 years ago, I'd been Rebecca Chen, rising star at Deloitte, with a corner office view and a reputation for uncompromising precision. Now I was Rebecca Thompson, the increasingly invisible wife of David Thompson, managing partner at Kleiner & Associates, who apparently found his secretary more compelling than the woman who'd supported him through law school and the lean years. That followed. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Maggie. Still on for lunch tomorrow? That new Thai place on Madison? I hesitated, then typed back. Absolutely. I have some news. The next morning, I dressed with particular care. Alexander McQueen pencil skirt, Louboutin heels, and the diamond earrings I'd bought myself after closing the Henderson audit. David had already left for work, or so his note on the counter claimed. I'd heard him slip out at 5:30 a.m., unusually early even for him. Running away before conversation could pin him down. Midtown Manhattan hummed with its usual frenetic energy as I made my way to meet Maggie. 10 years as a forensic accountant had made me particularly attuned to patterns and anomalies. The missing lipstick from Jennifer's desk when I'd surprised David with lunch last month. The credit card charges at a hotel 3 blocks from his office. The lingering glances at his phone, angled away from my view. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maggie waved from our table, her curly red hair unmistakable even through the crowded restaurant. She'd been my roommate in college, my maid of honor at my wedding, and the only person who'd questioned my choice to scale back my career when David's had accelerated. You look like you've either closed a massive case or you're about to commit a felony, she said as I sat down. Possibly both. I ordered a sparkling water with lime before meeting her eyes. David's having an affair with Jennifer. To her credit, Maggie didn't gasp or exclaim. She simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand. How long have you known? Suspected. A year. Known with certainty? As of last night. The waiter returned with our drinks. I took a measured sip while Maggie processed. What are you going to do? She finally asked. That depends entirely on David. I smoothed my napkin across my lap. But I've already contacted Miles Hoffman. Maggie's eyebrows shot up. Miles Hoffman was the most feared divorce attorney in Manhattan. That's decisive. I'm a forensic accountant, Maggie. I follow evidence and prepare for all scenarios. It's not emotional. It's procedural. Except it was emotional. Beneath my composed exterior, a hurricane was gathering force. 10 years of building a life with someone who could throw it away for the youngest partner in his firm's secretarial pool. Have you confronted him yet? Tonight. I checked my watch. I've scheduled a dinner reservation at Le Bernardin, his favorite restaurant. I thought I'd give him one last good meal before I detonate his life. Maggie's laugh held a note of admiration. You always were terrifyingly methodical. I've learned from the best. I sipped my water. My father didn't build Chen Global by being sentimental when people betrayed him. Maggie's expression shifted slightly. You never talk about your family's business. I shrugged one shoulder. David doesn't know the full extent of it. He thinks my father runs a moderately successful import-export business. He's never asked for details, and I've never volunteered them. Your husband doesn't know your family. Owns half of the shipping channels between here and Singapore? He knows I grew up comfortably. He knows my parents helped with the down payment on our house as a wedding gift. The rest? I trailed off. David has always been focused on his own career trajectory. The details of mine have been largely irrelevant. To him. The waiter returned to take our orders. After he left, Maggie leaned forward. So, what exactly is your plan? That depends on David's choice tonight. I'm giving him one opportunity to come clean. One chance to tell me everything without prompting. If he takes it, we'll discuss terms for an amicable separation. And if he doesn't? I smiled thinly. Then I remove my pieces from the board one by one until he realizes he's been playing chess against a grandmaster while thinking it was checkers. Rebecca. Maggie's voice held a note of concern. I'm not planning anything illegal, I assured her. Just thorough. I've maintained separate accounts he doesn't know about. I've documented every suspicious absence, every unexplained expense, every lie he's told me for the past year. If David forces my hand, I'll be prepared. Our food arrived, fragrant curries that would have normally tempted my appetite. Today, I barely tasted a bite. What about your job? Maggie asked between mouthfuls. Will you stay at Bennett and Zhao? I considered this. I'd stepped back from partnership track when David's career had accelerated, taking a senior manager position with reduced hours to accommodate his increasingly demanding schedule. The choice had seemed logical at the time, a temporary adjustment, while he established himself. I've already spoken with Zhao. They're offering me the partnership position again, effective immediately if I want it. Maggie's eyes widened. You've been busy. I prefer the term prepared. She studied me for a moment. You know, most people would be falling apart right now. Most people haven't spent their career following money trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. I set down my fork. Besides, falling apart won't solve anything. Action will. After lunch, I returned to the office, losing myself in the comforting precision of spreadsheets and financial reports. The Henderson case was particularly complex, a web of international transactions designed to obscure the movement of funds between subsidiaries. Normally, such puzzles absorbed me completely. Today, my mind kept returning to David. We'd met at Columbia, me finishing my master's in accounting, him in his second year of law school. He'd been charismatic, ambitious, with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. I'd been drawn to his drive, his clarity of purpose. He'd been drawn to… what? My organizational skills? My family connections? Though he'd never fully understood. Their extent? The challenge of the serious, focused woman who didn't immediately fall for his charm? Whatever the initial attraction, it had sustained us through his final year of law school, through his first struggling years at Kleiner and Associates, through the purchase of our home and the building of what I'd thought was a partnership, Ittori. 5:30, I closed my laptop and gathered my things. The reservation was for 7. I had just enough time to return home, change, and arrive at Le Bernardin looking perfectly composed when I handed David the metaphorical grenade that would demolish his comfortable existence. Our house was silent when I arrived. I moved through the familiar rooms with new awareness. The living room where we'd hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, the study where he claimed to work late when he was really with her, the bedroom where his scent still lingered on his pillow. I chose my outfit with surgical precision. A black Chanel dress that skimmed my figure without being overtly sexy, diamond studs that caught the light, the Cartier watch David had given me for our 5th anniversary. Armor disguised as elegance. At 6:40, I called an Uber. David had texted that he would meet me at the restaurant. Another late meeting, another transparent lie. I wondered if Jennifer would be with him until the last possible moment, straightening his tie, pressing her lips to his cheek, promising to wait for his return. Le Bernardin glowed with understated luxury as I approached. The maitre d' recognized me, escorting me to the corner table I'd requested. "Will Mr. Thompson be joining you shortly?" he inquired. "Yes, he's just finishing a meeting." The lie slipped out smoothly, protecting David's reputation even now. Another habit I would need to break. I ordered a glass of champagne and settled in to wait, scrolling through emails on my phone. A message from Miles Hoffman confirmed our appointment for tomorrow morning. Another from my father asked about our plans for the upcoming family dinner, an event David had already made excuses to miss. At 7:10, David arrived, looking harried but handsome in the charcoal suit I'd had tailored for him last Christmas. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, recently run through by nervous fingers or perhaps Jennifer's hands. "Sorry I'm late," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "The Mitchell merger is a nightmare. Anderson keeps changing the terms." I accepted his kiss without returning it, noting the faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine. I ordered champagne. "I thought we should celebrate." Wariness flickered in his blue eyes as he took his seat. "Celebrate what?" I raised my glass. 10 years, 3 months, and 17 days of marriage. He relaxed slightly, reaching for the champagne the server had. Just poured him. "Is that today?" "I'm sorry, Beck, with everything at work. It's not an anniversary," I interrupted smoothly. "Just the total time we've been married. Until today." His glass paused halfway to his lips. "What do you mean?" "I think you know, David." I kept my voice gentle, my expression neutral. "This is your opportunity to tell me yourself, to show me that kind of respect at least." He set down his glass, his lawyer's mind visibly racing through possibilities, calculating risks and defenses. "Rebecca, if this is about the late hours, it's about Jennifer," I said, still quiet. "It's about the Mayfield Hotel 3 blocks from your office. It's about deleted text messages and lunch meetings that don't appear on your calendar. It's about lies, David. Months and months of lies." The color drained from his face. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, might force me to produce the evidence I'd so meticulously gathered. Instead, his shoulders slumped infinitesimally. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Long enough." I took a sip of champagne. "The question isn't what I know, David. It's what you're going to do now." He stared at me. This man I'd shared a bed with for a decade, suddenly a stranger. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. And then I want you to listen while I tell you what happens next." The server approached with menus, sensing the tension but professionally ignoring it. David ordered a scotch, neat. I requested the tasting menu for one. "You're not eating?" he asked after the server departed. "I'll be staying." "You won't be here that long." His face flushed. "You're throwing me out of dinner now?" I'm giving you a chance to exit gracefully, with your dignity partially intact. Whether you take it is up to you. The scotch arrived. David drained half of it in one swallow. It started 6 months ago, he began, his voice low. The Mitchell merger. We were working late every night. She was always there, always supportive. It just happened. 6 months. My calculated estimate had been accurate. I nodded for him. To continue. I never meant to hurt you, Rebecca. You have to believe that. It was just... You and I, we've become like roommates. When was the last time we really talked? Really connected? March 17th. I replied promptly. We had dinner at that Italian place in the village. You told me about the Stewart case. I told you about the Henderson audit. You seemed interested, engaged. I thought we'd turned a corner. I paused. That was the night you first slept with her, wasn't it? His wince confirmed it. The night I'd thought we were reconnecting, he'd been comparing me to her, finding me wanting. It wasn't planned, he said weakly. Few betrayals are. I sipped my champagne. Is it serious? He hesitated, his hand tightening around his scotch glass. I think I love her. The words should have shattered me. Instead, they simply confirmed what I'd already deduced. I see. And what exactly do you envision happening now, David? You leave me for your secretary, face the judgment of your colleagues, risk your chance at partnership, all for a woman 15 years your junior? His eyes hardened slightly. She's not just my secretary. Jennifer has a master's degree in communications. She's intelligent, thoughtful. I'm sure she has many wonderful qualities, I interrupted. That wasn't my question. What is your plan? He looked down at his drink. I want a divorce. There it was. The sword I'd been watching hover finally dropped. All right, I said calmly. I've taken the liberty of consulting with Miles Hoffman. I have an appointment with him tomorrow morning. David's head jerked up. Hoffman? Rebecca? That's not necessary. We can keep this civilized. I prefer to be represented by the best, just as you'll undoubtedly retain Patricia Winters. I named his firm's most aggressive divorce attorney. I'm not trying to take advantage of you, he protested. We can split everything 50-50. The house, the accounts. I've already transferred my personal inheritance into separate accounts, I informed him. As for the house, I'll be keeping it. You can't just decide that. I can and have. My family provided the down payment, as you'll recall. I've maintained the property while you've built your career. And as of last month, I've been making the mortgage payments from my personal account since you've been diverting funds to maintain Jennifer in that charming apartment in Chelsea. His face went slack with shock. How did you... Forensic accountant. David. It's quite literally what I do. I set down my champagne glass. Now, here's what's going to happen. You will move out tonight. You'll take only your personal belongings. Tomorrow, we begin formal proceedings. If you cooperate fully, disclose all assets honestly, and agree to my reasonable terms, this can be relatively painless. If not, I let the alternative hang unspoken. You've got it all figured out, he said bitterly. One of us had to. The server returned with my first course, a delicate scallop crudo that normally would have delighted me. Today, it was merely fuel. So that's it? David asked, his voice rising slightly. 10 years of marriage, and you're just done? You were done 6 months ago, I corrected gently. You just didn't have the courage to tell me. I'm simply expediting the inevitable. He drained his scotch, signaling for another. What about couples counseling? A separation? Don't we owe our marriage more than this? The question nearly made me laugh. You've been sleeping with your secretary for 6 months, and now you're concerned about what we owe our marriage? People make mistakes, Rebecca. If you'd been more present, if your work hadn't always been your priority. I held up a hand, stopping him. Don't. Don't you dare try to shift the blame. I scaled back my career for you. I managed our home, your schedule, your social obligations. I supported every step of your advancement. If I became secondary in our relationship, it's because you put me there. His second scotch arrived. The restaurant hummed around us, other couples enjoying romantic dinners, business associates sealing deals, all oblivious to the quiet demolition of a decade-long marriage happening in the corner. When did you become so cold? David asked. More wounded than angry. I'm not cold, I replied truthfully. I'm controlled. There's a difference. I've spent 18 months watching my husband slip away, making excuses for his absences, lying to myself about what was happening. I've earned the right to handle this my way. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Perhaps he hadn't. Not really. Not the woman beneath the supportive wife persona I'd cultivated to fit into his life. What will you tell people? He asked finally. The truth. That we've grown apart and decided to separate. I have no interest in humiliating you publicly, David. Despite your actions, your colleagues, your family, they need never know about Jennifer unless you choose to tell them. Relief flickered across his face, followed quickly by suspicion. Why would you protect me like that? I'm not protecting you. I'm protecting myself from the pity that would inevitably follow if people knew my husband left me for his 28-year-old secretary. It's a cliché I have no interest in embodying. My first course remained untouched. I pushed it aside as the server arrived with the second. A perfectly seared piece of fish I knew I wouldn't taste. I'll need time to pack, David said, his voice subdued. You can return tomorrow while I'm at work. Take only what's indisputably yours. I've prepared an inventory. I reached into my clutch and handed him a folded paper. Miles will contact Patricia tomorrow afternoon with the proposed settlement terms. He took the paper, glancing at it before stuffing it into his pocket. You've really thought of everything. Not everything, I admitted. I never thought you'd betray me like this. For the first time, real pain crossed his face. Rebecca, it's time for you to go, David. Jennifer's waiting, I'm sure. He flinched at her name. For a moment, he looked like he might argue further, might fight for… What? Not our marriage. That was clearly over. Perhaps just his pride. Instead, he stood, dropping his napkin beside his untouched place setting. I'll have Patricia contact Miles about scheduling a time for me to collect my things. I nodded, already turning my attention to my phone, dismissing him. He hesitated, then walked away, his footsteps fading into the ambient noise of the restaurant. Only when I was certain he was gone did I allow myself a single deep breath, a momentary closing of my eyes. Then I straightened my shoulders and focused on the meal before me. I had chosen this restaurant deliberately, and I intended to enjoy every exquisite bite. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body instinctively reaching for David's side of the bed before memory caught up. The sheets were cold, undisturbed. He hadn't come home last night, not that I'd expected him to. I completed my usual morning routine with mechanical precision. 5-mile run through the quiet Westchester streets, protein smoothie, shower, makeup applied with practiced strokes. By 7:30, I was dressed in a charcoal Armani suit, hair swept into a sleek chignon, ready to meet with Miles Hoffman before heading to the office. The house felt different already, emptier, yet somehow less suffocating. I paused in the foyer, looking at the wedding photo that still hung on the wall. We'd looked so young, so certain. David gazing at me with what I'd thought was adoration. Perhaps it had been once. I took the photo down, placing it in the hall closet. The first excision, of many to come. Miles Hoffman's office occupied the top floor of a sleek midtown building. The reception area was designed to intimidate, all steel and glass and stark white surfaces. The receptionist, an immaculately groomed young man, greeted me by name. Ms. Chen, Mr. Hoffman is expecting you. I noted his use of my maiden name with approval. Miles was nothing if not thorough. The man himself rose from behind his minimalist desk as I entered his office. Tall, silver-haired, with the lean build of a distance runner, Miles Hoffman had a reputation for ruthless efficiency matched only by his astronomical fees. "Rebecca," he greeted me, his voice warm despite his intimidating demeanor. We'd worked together on several cases where forensic accounting had intersected with divorce proceedings. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. "As do I replied, taking the seat he offered. "But here we are." "Indeed." He sat across from me, steepling his fingers. "You spoke with your husband?" "Last night. He's agreed to move out immediately. He wants a divorce." Miles nodded, making a note. "And his reason?" "He's in love with his secretary." I kept my voice neutral, factual. "They've been involved for approximately 6 months." "Classic," Miles murmured without judgment. "And the prenuptial agreement?" "We don't have one." At his raised eyebrow, I added, "David had nothing when we married. I had my inheritance, which has remained in separate accounts. My family's business interests have never been commingled with our marital assets." "Your family's shipping empire, you mean?" At my surprised look, he smiled slightly. "I do my research. Rebecca, Chen Global controls significant maritime commerce between North America and Asia. Your father, James Chen, is notoriously private about his business holdings, but thorough nonetheless." I inclined my head, acknowledging the point. My father believes in privacy, not secrecy. There's a difference. Indeed, there is. "Now, what are your priorities in this dissolution?" I laid out my terms clearly. The house would remain mine. My retirement accounts and investments would remain untouched, and I wanted a clean break with no alimony in either direction. In exchange, David could keep his own retirement accounts and the vacation property in the Hamptons we'd purchased 3 years prior. Miles made notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he looked up with something like approval in his gray eyes. "Most clients come to me emotional, uncertain. You've arrived with a battle plan." "I prefer to think of it as an exit strategy," I corrected. "I have no interest in punishing David. I simply want what's fair." "Fair," Miles repeated thoughtfully. "An uncommon concept in divorce proceedings." "Perhaps. But dragging this out serves neither of us. David wants his freedom. I want to preserve what I've built. A protracted legal battle would only benefit you and Patricia Winters." Miles's mouth quirked. "You're bad for business, Rebecca. I'm efficient. There's a difference." After finalizing our strategy, I headed to the office. Bennett and Zhao occupied 3 floors of a building in the financial district, the firm's name discreetly etched on glass doors. As I walked through the busy corridors toward my office, I nodded to colleagues, maintaining the same professional demeanor I always had. Only Helen Zhao, waiting in my office, would know that anything had changed. "Rebecca," she greeted me, rising from the visitor's chair. At 62, Helen Zhao had the energy of someone decades younger and the sharp mind that had built Bennett and Zhao into one of the most respected forensic accounting firms in the country. "How did it go with Miles?" I closed the door before answering. "As expected, David's agreed to move out. The divorce proceedings will begin today." Helen nodded, her dark eyes assessing. "And you? How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." At her skeptical, "Look," I amended, "I will be fine. I've prepared for this possibility for months." Preparing and experiencing are different things. Helen had been a friend of my mother's before becoming my mentor. She'd known me since childhood, had watched me build my career and then step back from it when David's needs had taken precedence. "The partnership offer stands. Take some time to consider it." "I don't need time," I replied. "I want it. Effective. As soon as you can make it happen." A small smile curved Helen's lips. "I thought you might say that. The paperwork is ready. We can announce it next week after you've had time to settle your personal affairs. After Helen left, I turned to my computer, losing myself in the complexities of the Henderson case. Numbers had always been my refuge, their immutable logic, their refusal to lie if you knew how to read them properly. Unlike people, spreadsheets didn't hide affairs or make promises they had no intention of keeping. At lunch, I received a text from David. Patricia contacted Miles. I'll be at the house at 7 to collect some things. Is that acceptable? The formality was new, a defensive shield against the vulnerability of our last conversation. I responded with equal detachment. That's fine. I'll be out until 9. His reply came immediately. You don't need to leave. It's still your home too. I didn't bother correcting his use of "too," as if he still had equal claim to the space. Instead, I simply wrote, I have dinner plans. The security code is unchanged. I did have dinner plans. With myself, at the small Italian restaurant in the village I'd discovered years ago, and had rarely visited since David pronounced it too far from home after his first partnership promotion. Tonight would be the beginning of reclaiming pieces of myself I'd set aside for the convenience of my marriage. The afternoon passed in a productivity haze. At 5, I gathered my things and left the office, nodding to the security guard as I passed. Instead of heading directly to the restaurant, I made a detour to a boutique in Soho I'd always admired but rarely entered. The sales associate approached as I examined a sleek black dress with an asymmetrical neckline. Can I help you? Find anything specific? I'm rebuilding my wardrobe, I said, surprising myself with the admission. I need pieces that transition from office to evening, nothing conservative. Understanding lit her eyes. New job or new life? Both. She nodded knowingly. I have just the collection for you. An hour later, I left with 3 dresses, 2 blouses, and a striking red suit that would have been unthinkable in my previous life as David Thompson's supportive wife. The purchases felt like declarations of independence, small ones, but significant nonetheless. At the restaurant, I requested a table near the window, ordering a glass of Barolo and the handmade pasta I remembered from years before. As I waited, I checked my email. Miles had already sent over the initial divorce filing for my review. Helen had forwarded the partnership paperwork with a note. Welcome back to your future. My pasta arrived, fragrant with garlic and fresh herbs. As I twirled, the first forkful, my phone buzzed with another text from David. Where did you put my Harvard Law sweatshirt? It's not in the closet. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I replied, bottom drawer of the guest room dresser, with the rest of your casual clothes. After a moment, another text. Found it. Thanks. Where are the photo albums from the Amalfi trip? Study bookshelf bottom row. I set my phone down, focusing on my meal. It buzzed again. Rebecca, we need to talk about this. Really talk. Not in a restaurant with you handing me walking papers. Can we meet tomorrow? Neutral territory? I stared at the message. The rational part of me recognized it for what it was. David's lawyer had likely advised him that an amenable ex-wife would make the proceedings smoother. The emotional part, the part I'd ruthlessly suppressed since finding the first evidence of his betrayal, whispered that perhaps he regretted his choices. I silenced both voices and replied, There's nothing to discuss that can't be handled through our attorneys. Please refer further questions to Miles. His response came seconds later. This isn't like you, Rebecca. The coldness, the attorneys. Where's the woman I married? The question ignited a flash of anger I hadn't allowed myself to, feel. I typed quickly. She's the one you cheated on for 6 months while lying to her face. The one you decided wasn't worth honesty or respect. She's gone, David. You left her behind when you started sleeping with Jennifer. I sent it before I could reconsider, then immediately turned off my phone. My hands were shaking slightly, the first visible crack in my carefully maintained composure. I took a deep breath, then another, centering myself in the moment. The pasta was getting cold. I forced myself to take another bite, to savor the rich flavors. This was my dinner, my evening, my life now. David Thompson no longer had the power to disrupt it unless I gave him that power. I finished my meal, ordered tiramisu and an espresso, and deliberately kept my phone off until I'd paid the bill and stepped back onto the busy village street. When I finally turned it back on, there were no more texts from David. Instead, there was an email from an address I didn't immediately recognize. The subject line simply read, David. I opened it while standing on the corner, pedestrians flowing around me like water around a stone. Rebecca, you don't know me, but I'm Jennifer Ames. David's, well, I guess you know who I am by now. I want you to know that David never intended to hurt you. What happened between us wasn't planned. It just grew from working so closely together, from understanding each other in ways that sometimes happen in professional settings. He respects you tremendously. He talks about how brilliant you are, how supportive you've been throughout his career. He never wanted it to end this way. I hope in time you'll be able to forgive him, not for my sake, but for yours. Holding on to anger only hurts you in the end. Sincerely, Jennifer. I stared at the message, a peculiar calm settling over me. The absolute audacity of this woman, to contact me, to presume to advise me on my emotional well-being, to position herself as the voice of reason while sleeping with my husband, was almost admirable in its brazenness. I considered various responses. Icy dismissal, righteous anger, cutting wit. In the end, I simply deleted the email without replying. Jennifer Ames wasn't worthy of my words, my time, or my emotional energy. Instead, I hailed a cab and directed the driver to take me home, arriving well before the 9 p.m. time frame I'd given David. If he was still there, so be it. This was my house, my territory. I wouldn't skulk around the edges of my own life to make his betrayal more comfortable. As the cab pulled into my driveway, I noted David's BMW still parked on the street. The lights glowed warmly from within the house, creating the illusion of welcome, of normalcy. For a moment, muscle memory nearly took over, the instinct to call out, "I'm home," as I entered, to listen for his reply from the study, to slip into the routine we'd established over a decade. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, adjusted my new purchases on my arm, and walked through the front door like the owner I was. David was in the living room, surrounded by boxes half filled with books, records, the accumulations of our shared life being sorted into his and not his. He looked up as I entered, surprise evident on his face. "You're early," he said, stating the obvious. "It's my house," I replied simply, setting my shopping bags on the console table. "How's the packing going?" He gestured to the scattered boxes. "Slowly. There's a lot to go through." "Yes, 10 years creates quite an accumulation." I moved into the kitchen, filling the electric kettle for tea. David followed, hovering in the doorway. "I didn't take anything that seemed questionable," he said. "Only what's clearly mine." "I appreciate that." I selected a tea bag, dropping it into a mug. "Do you need any help?" The question seemed to throw him. "You're offering to help me pack to leave you?" "I'm offering to expedite a process that's painful for both of us." The kettle clicked off. I poured the steaming water over the tea bag. "But if you'd prefer to handle it alone, that's fine." 2. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it sent an unexpected pang through my chest. "I got your text, before you turned your phone off." "I got your text, before you turned your phone off." I took a careful sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through me. I meant what I said. That's what concerns me. David leaned against the doorframe, his posture betraying exhaustion. "This isn't you, Rebecca. This cold calculation, the immediate lawyer, the refusal to even try. Try. What exactly?" I interrupted, setting my mug down with deliberate care. Try to forgive you for 6 months of lying? Try to rebuild trust that you systematically destroyed? Try to compete with a woman 15 years younger who's already sharing your bed? He winced. When you put it like that? How else would you put it, David? I kept my voice level despite the sudden rush of anger. You made your choice. I'm simply responding to it with the efficiency you once claimed to admire about me. He pushed away from the door frame, moving further into the kitchen. Rebecca, please, can we just sit down and talk about this like rational people, without lawyers and ultimatums? I gestured to the kitchen table. By all means. He seemed surprised by my acquiescence, hesitating before pulling out a chair. I remained standing, leaning against the counter, maintaining the higher ground both literally and figuratively. I know I've hurt you, he began, and I can't take that back. But ending a 10-year marriage deserves more consideration than this. How? Much consideration did you give it before sleeping with Jennifer? I asked quietly. David had the grace to look ashamed. That's not fair. No, I agreed. None of this is fair. But it is reality. You're in love with someone else. You want a divorce. I'm simply facilitating the outcome you desire. I never said I wanted a divorce, he protested. You're the one who contacted a lawyer. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. You told me, and I quote, I want a divorce, at Le Bernardin. Last night. He ran a hand through his hair again. I was caught off guard. You ambushed me with accusations. Factual statements, I corrected, and expected me to have a perfectly formed response. Yes, I've been seeing Jennifer. Yes, I have feelings for her. But that doesn't mean I want to throw away a decade of marriage without even attempting to work through this. I studied him, this man I'd once known better than anyone. Was this genuine remorse or merely the shock of consequences catching up to actions? David had always been skilled at recasting narratives to suit his needs, a talent that made him an excellent lawyer and, apparently, an accomplished adulterer. If you don't want a divorce, I said carefully, what exactly do you want? He hesitated, considering his words. Time, space to figure things out. Maybe a separation while we both decide what we really want. And Jennifer? I pressed. Would this time and space include continuing your relationship with her? His silence was answer enough. So you want to keep me in reserve, I translated, while you explore whether Jennifer is truly the one. You want the security of knowing your wife of 10 years is waiting patiently at home while you decide if trading her in for a newer model is worth the social and financial complications. That's not, it is, I cut him off. And my answer is no. I won't be your safety net, David. I won't be the sensible option you return to if the excitement of your affair fades. I deserve better than that. He looked genuinely surprised, as if this possibility had never occurred to him. Perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps in the narrative he'd constructed, I would either fight desperately to keep him or collapse in devastation at his betrayal. My calm efficiency had thrown him off script. You've already made your choice, I continued. When you first slept. With Jennifer. When you lied to my face repeatedly for months. When you told me you love her. Those weren't moments of weakness, David. They were decisions. Hundreds of individual decisions to betray our marriage. People make mistakes, he said quietly. Yes, they do. And sometimes those mistakes have permanent consequences. I moved to the kitchen doorway, signaling that our conversation was ending. You should finish packing what you need tonight. My attorney will coordinate with Patricia about retrieving the rest of your belongings. David stood, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. So that's it? You're not even willing to consider any option besides divorce? You've been considering divorce for 6 months, I pointed out. You just didn't have the courage to initiate it yourself. He moved toward me, stopping when I subtly shifted away. "I still care about you, Rebecca. That never changed." "That makes it worse, not better." I stepped fully into the hallway. "Good night, David. Please lock up when you leave." I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, hearing him resume packing in the living room below. Inside, I changed into silk pajamas, removed my makeup, and completed my nighttime routine with mechanical precision. Only when I was beneath the covers, lights dimmed, did I allow myself to feel the full weight of the day. 10 years of marriage, ending not with a dramatic fight, but with quiet, irrevocable words in a kitchen we'd once shared. The future I'd planned. The children we'd discussed having someday, the retirement we'd mapped out, the life we'd built, all of it evaporating like morning fog. I didn't cry. The time for tears had passed during those 18 months of suspicion and growing certainty. Instead, I pulled out my tablet and began making lists: accounts to separate, services to cancel, people to notify. The practical details of dismantling a shared life. At some point, I heard the front door close, followed by the sound of David's BMW starting in the driveway. He was gone, off to Jennifer's Chelsea apartment, to a hotel, to somewhere that wasn't here. The house settled. Around me, creaking and sighing as houses do at night, it felt emptier without him, but also somehow more mine. I fell asleep making plans. The next week passed in a blur of activity. By day, I immersed myself in work, accepting the partnership offer formally and diving into the expanded responsibilities with focused intensity. By night, I methodically reclaimed my home, rearranging furniture, ordering new bedding, donating David's abandoned clothes to charity. Miles Hoffman sent daily updates on the divorce proceedings. David had retained Patricia Winters as expected, and she was taking an aggressive stance despite his supposed desire for reconciliation. They contested my claim to the house, demanded a larger portion of our joint investments, questioned the separation of my inheritance. Standard tactics, Miles assured me, designed to establish a stronger negotiating position rather than reflect genuine expectations. I responded to each demand with documented evidence, financial records tracking the source of funds for the house, down payment, investment account statements showing the origin of each contribution, years of meticulous bookkeeping that separated marital assets from my personal inheritance. My professional expertise had never been more personally valuable. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the confrontation at Le Bernardin, Maggie arrived at my door with 2 bottles of wine and a determined expression. "You're not spending another night alone in this mausoleum," she announced, pushing past me into the foyer. "We're getting drunk and making inappropriate comments about men, as divorce tradition demands." Despite myself, I smiled. "I have an early meeting tomorrow. Reschedule it." She headed for the kitchen, her curls bouncing with each step. "You've been in robot mode all week. Time to process like a normal human being." I followed her, watching as she located wine glasses with unerring accuracy. "I'm fine, Maggie, really." She turned, fixing me with a skeptical look as she poured generous measures of cabernet. "Rebecca Chen Thompson, I've known you since you were 18 years old. You're not fine. You're functioning, which isn't the same thing." She handed me a glass and raised her own, to new beginnings. And to David Thompson realizing exactly what he lost when he's crying into his cornflakes a month from now. I clinked my glass against hers, taking a small sip. "I don't want him back, you know. Even if he came crawling." "I know." Maggie hopped onto a counter stool. "But I still want him to suffer appropriately. Now tell me everything. And not the sanitized spreadsheet version you've been telling yourself. The real version with feelings and everything." I leaned against the kitchen island, considering her request. "I don't know if I can do that yet. The feelings are complicated." "Start simple," she suggested. "Are you sad?" "Sometimes," I admitted. Not about losing David, specifically. More about losing the future I thought we were building. Are you angry? I took another sip of wine. Less than I probably should be. Mostly I'm disappointed. In his choices, in my own blindness, in how predictable it all turned out to be. Maggie nodded encouragingly. What about relieved? Any of that? The question caught me off guard. Relieved? Come on, Beck. You scaled back your career for him. You managed his life. You planned everything around his schedule, his needs, his ambitions. Is there not even a tiny part of you that feels liberated? I considered this, turning the wine glass between my fingers. I suppose there is. This partnership, for instance. I wouldn't have accepted it if we were still together. It would have meant less time managing our home, less availability when he needed me. Which was always, Maggie interjected. Not always, I corrected automatically, then paused. But often. And yes, there's a certain freedom in making decisions solely based on what I want. Such as? Maggie prompted. I'm redecorating the master bedroom, I offered. David always insisted on that heavy, masculine furniture. I'm replacing it with something lighter, more modern. Good start. What else? I found myself warming to the topic. I've joined that Pilates studio in town, the one with the 6 a.m. classes. David said we're disruptive to his sleep. I've bought new clothes that he would have called impractical or too bold. I'm considering taking a vacation by myself to Japan. I've always wanted to see Kyoto. Maggie grinned. Now we're talking. This is what I want to hear. Rebecca Chen, Renaissance woman, emerging from the ashes of Rebecca Thompson, corporate wife. I laughed despite myself. You're being dramatic. I'm being supportive, she corrected. And I'm coming with you to Kyoto. My Japanese is better than yours. We finished the first bottle of wine in the living room, reminiscing about our college days, speculating about mutual friends, deliberately avoiding further discussion of David or the divorce. It felt normal, comfortable, a reminder that parts of my life remained unchanged despite the seismic shift in my marital status. As Maggie opened the second bottle, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it, then set it aside. David? Maggie asked, refilling our glasses. Jennifer, actually. Maggie nearly dropped the bottle. The secretary? She's texting you now? What kind of Twilight Zone audacity? She wants to meet, I said, cutting off Maggie's building indignation. To clear the air and establish a respectful relationship moving forward. Oh my God. Maggie set down the wine with deliberate care. Please tell me you're not considering this. Of course not. I took a sip from my refreshed glass. There's nothing to discuss. She slept with my husband. I'm divorcing him. End of story. What did you reply? I didn't. Just like I didn't reply to her email last week. Maggie settled back, against the couch cushions. Good. Maintain the high ground. Though I wouldn't judge you if you wanted to pour a glass of red wine over her head. Hypothetically speaking, I smiled at the image. Tempting, but ultimately unsatisfying. Besides, she's hardly worth the cost of dry cleaning my clothes afterward. That's my girl. Maggie raised her glass in salute. Ice cold and practical too. The end. The description gave me pause. Was that how people saw me? Ice cold? Was that how David had seen me, in the end? The thought was unexpectedly painful. I'm not cold, I said quietly. I just don't see the point in public dramatics. It won't change the situation. Maggie's expression softened. I know, Beck. I was kidding. You're the most loyal, dedicated person I know. It's not your fault David was too stupid to appreciate that. We lapsed into comfortable silence, the wine working its slow magic on my perpetually whirring mind. After a while, Maggie spoke again. Have you told your parents yet? I shook my head. Not yet. They're in Singapore until next month. I'll tell them when they return. They never liked David much, did they? They were reserved about him, I admitted. My father thought he was too focused on appearances, too concerned with status. My mother thought he didn't appreciate me enough. Smart people, your parents. They'll be disappointed, though. You know how traditional they are about marriage. Maggie snorted inelegantly. Your father runs one of the largest shipping companies in Asia. Your mother single-handedly revolutionized logistics technology in the 90s. They're hardly conventional people, Beck. In business, perhaps. In personal matters, they're decidedly old-fashioned. They want you to be happy, Maggie countered. And David wasn't making you happy. Not for a long time. The observation struck me with unexpected force. When had I last been truly happy with David? Before the affair, certainly, but even earlier, before his promotion to partner, before his increasing absorption in his career and social climbing, before I'd become an accessory to his ambitions rather than a partner in our shared life. No, I agreed softly. He wasn't. We finished the second bottle as midnight approached. Maggie, too tipsy to drive home, took the guest room, and I retired to my newly redecorated bedroom, the wine creating a pleasant buffer between me and my thoughts. Morning arrived with a mild headache and several text notifications. 2 from David, sent late last night. We need to talk about the Hamptons house. I found a buyer interested in an off-market deal. And then, are you with someone? I drove by and saw another car in the driveway. The possessiveness, the assumption that he still had any right to question my whereabouts or visitors, sent a flare of irritation through me. I ignored both messages, focusing instead on a third notification, an email from Helen Zhao marked urgent. I opened it to find details of an emergency client situation. The CEO of Meridian Investments, one of our largest clients, had discovered significant accounting irregularities and needed immediate assistance before markets opened on Monday. Helen wanted me to lead the response team, starting today. Any other Saturday, I might have hesitated, thinking of David's potential plans or social obligations. Today, I responded immediately. I'll be at the office in 90 minutes. I showered and dressed quickly, leaving a note for Maggie explaining my early departure. The drive into Manhattan was lighter than usual, weekend traffic still minimal at 7:30 a.m. I stopped for coffee at the small shop near our office, ordering my usual black, no sugar, and on impulse a chocolate croissant I would normally have denied myself. Helen was already in the conference room when I arrived, surrounded by preliminary reports and financial statements. She looked up. As I entered, relief evident in her expression. Rebecca, thank you for coming in so quickly. This is potentially catastrophic for Meridian. I set down my coffee, already scanning the documents spread across the table. Walk me through what we know. For the next 10 hours, we immersed ourselves in Meridian's financial records, tracing discrepancies, identifying patterns, building a comprehensive picture of what appeared to be deliberate accounting fraud, orchestrated by the company's CFO. I worked with methodical precision, each discovery leading to the next, the complex puzzle absorbing all my attention. It was nearly 7 p.m. when I finally sat back, stretching muscles stiff from hours of focused concentration. We have enough to present a preliminary report to the CEO tomorrow. The fraud is contained to 3 subsidiaries, all under Morgan's direct supervision. Helen nodded, reviewing my notes. Excellent work, Rebecca. I knew you were the right person for this. She closed the file folder before her. And how are you doing? With everything else? The question, coming after hours of professional focus, momentarily disoriented me. Everything else? Oh, you mean the divorce. It's proceeding. That's not what I asked. Helen's tone was gentle but firm. How are you doing? I considered deflecting again, but Helen had been more than a mentor to me. She'd been a guide through the often challenging intersection of being a woman, being Chinese American, and being in a field dominated by men. She deserved honesty. I'm recalibrating, I said finally. learning to plan for one instead of two. It's an adjustment. Helen nodded, understanding in her dark eyes. When my husband died, the hardest part wasn't the grief. It was relearning how to make decisions without considering another person's needs or preferences. I'd been married for 32 years, longer than I'd been single. I had to rediscover who I was on my own. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd spent my entire adult life with David, moving from college to marriage with barely a pause between. Who was Rebecca Chen without David Thompson? I'm sorry about today, Helen continued. Your first weekend as a newly single woman, and I've kept you working for 10 hours. Don't apologize, I replied sincerely. This is exactly what I needed. Focused, challenging work where my expertise actually matters. It's clarifying. Well, in that case, I'm pleased to inform you that the partnership announcement will go out Monday morning. The board approved it unanimously. Helen gathered her things, preparing to leave. We'll need you in Hong Kong next month for the Asian Division quarterly review. Will that be a problem with your personal situation? Not at all. The prospect of international travel, once complicated by David's schedule and expectations, now seemed refreshingly straightforward. I've always enjoyed Hong Kong. Helen smiled. Good. Take tomorrow to rest. I'll handle the meeting with Meridian's CEO. I nodded, though we both knew I would review her presentation materials regardless. After she left, I spent another hour organizing our findings before finally gathering my things to leave. Outside, the early evening air was crisp with approaching autumn. Rather than heading directly to my car, I decided to walk a few blocks, stretching my legs and clearing my mind. Manhattan on a Saturday night pulsed with energy. Couples heading to dinner, friends gathering for drinks, families returning from Broadway matinees. For the first time, I observed these groupings not with a vague sense of exclusion, but with curiosity. Which of these smiling couples were genuinely happy? Which were going through the motions, maintaining appearances while privately harboring resentments or secrets? How many of these seemingly perfect partnerships would eventually implode as mine had? My phone buzzed in my bag. David again. Rebecca? Please respond about the Hamptons house. The buyer needs an answer by Monday. I stopped walking, considering my response. The house in the Hamptons had been a point of contention in our negotiations, a property we'd purchased jointly but that David used far more frequently for entertaining clients and colleagues. I'd initially conceded it to him in the settlement, not out of generosity, but practicality. I had no particular attachment to the place. Now, however, David's urgency suggested an opportunity. I called Miles Hoffman directly. Rebecca, he answered on the second ring. Working on a Saturday night? As are you, apparently, I noted. David is pushing to sell the Hamptons property quickly. There's an interested buyer. Interesting timing, Miles mused. Just as we're finalizing property divisions. My thoughts exactly. He needs cash, Miles. That's the only reason he'd rush to sell an asset like this. Can we use that? Certainly. If he's in financial difficulty, it strengthens our position considerably. I'll contact Patricia first thing Monday to revisit their counteroffer. After ending the call, I texted David. Any sale of the Hamptons property will need to be approved by both parties until the divorce is finalized. Have your agent contact Miles on Monday. His response came immediately. This is a time-sensitive opportunity, Rebecca. Why involve the lawyers? Because we're getting divorced, David. All financial matters go through counsel. I put my phone away and resumed walking, a small smile playing at my lips. David's financial pressure wasn't surprising. His lifestyle had always stretched the boundaries of our income, even with my contributions. Without my careful management of our joint finances, he was likely discovering just how expensive his habits truly were. And then there was Jennifer. Was she living with him now? Contributing to expenses? Or was David maintaining two households? His temporary accommodations plus financial support for his girlfriend's Chelsea apartment. Either scenario would strain his resources significantly. By the time I reached my car, my smile had grown. Not out of malice at David's predicament, but from the realization that I was free of it. His financial choices, his daily struggles, his future plans, none of these were my concern anymore. The relief was unexpectedly sweet. I drove home through the gathering darkness, the city lights receding in my rearview mirror. At a stoplight, I glanced at my reflection in the window. A woman alone in a car, heading toward an empty house, carrying the responsibility of her life entirely on her own shoulders. It should have felt daunting. Instead, it felt like possibility. Sunday. Morning dawned clear and bright. Without setting an alarm, I'd still woken at 6 a.m., my body conditioned by years of early rising. Instead of immediately starting my day, however, I allowed myself the luxury of lingering in bed, staring at the ceiling and simply breathing. The house was quiet around me, absent of David's Saturday morning routines. The coffee grinder running. Too loudly, sports commentary from the television in his study, the rustle of the Financial Times as he complained about market projections. The silence felt peaceful rather than empty. Eventually, I rose, pulling on running clothes and lacing up the shoes I kept by the door. The neighborhood was just stirring as I set out, a few dedicated dog walkers nodding as I passed. I ran farther than usual, pushing beyond my typical 5-mile route to explore streets I rarely visited, greeting the morning with each rhythmic footfall. When I returned, flushed and invigorated, I showered and made a light breakfast, carrying it out to the back patio. Another space I seldom used when David was home, as he preferred eating indoors, regardless of the weather. The garden needed attention, I noted. Perhaps I'd hire a landscaper to replant the beds with something more colorful than the subdued greenery David had preferred. My phone chimed with an email notification. Not work this time, but a reminder from the charity organization where I volunteered monthly. They were holding their annual fundraising gala next weekend, an event David had always dismissed as inefficient philanthropy compared to simple donation. I'd skipped the last 2 years at his insistence. This year, I RSVP'd immediately for a single ticket. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting visitors, and for a moment I tensed, wondering if David had decided to push our conversation about the Hamptons property in person. Instead, I opened the door to find Maggie holding 2 takeout bags from my favorite dim sum place in the city. "Brunch," she announced, pushing past me into the house. "And before you say you're busy, I already checked with Helen. The Meridian crisis is handled for today, and you have no other commitments." I followed her to the kitchen, smiling despite myself. Do all my friends routinely check my schedule with my boss? Only when we're concerned you might be working yourself into distraction to avoid feelings. Maggie began unpacking containers of hargao, siumai, and char siu bao. "Helen mentioned you were there for 10 hours yesterday." "It was an emergency," I protested mildly, gathering plates and utensils. "And it was productive. We identified the source of the accounting irregularities." Maggie hummed skeptically, opening containers. "And it had nothing to do with avoiding an empty house and thoughts about your failed marriage." I placed the plates on the kitchen island with more force than necessary. "My marriage didn't fail, Maggie. It was deliberately sabotaged by one of its participants." "Fair point," she conceded, passing me a dumpling. "But you're still avoiding feelings." I bit into the dumpling rather than responding immediately. After swallowing, I said, "I'm processing in my own way. Not everyone needs to dramatically emote to heal." "True." Maggie selected a bao bun. "But most people need some form of outlet. When was the last time you cried, or yelled, or did anything to release the pressure?" The question gave me pause. When had I last expressed raw emotion? Not during the 18 months of suspicion. Not during the confrontation at Le Bernardin. Not during David's move-out. I'd maintained control throughout, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I'm not bottling things up, I said finally. I'm channeling my energy productively. The partnership, the house renovations, my exercise routine, they're all healthy outlets. Maggie looked unconvinced but didn't press further. Instead, she changed tactics. Speaking of renovations, I drove past a new furniture store in Soho yesterday. Very mid-century modern. Exactly your taste, not David's. Want to check it out after? We eat? The suggestion, so normal, so unconnected to divorce proceedings or work emergencies, was unexpectedly appealing. Actually, yes, I need a new bedroom set. Maggie's face lit up. Shopping therapy it is. We spent the afternoon wandering through furniture showrooms, debating the merits of different woods and fabrics, envisioning how each piece might transform my space from our bedroom to my bedroom. I purchased a sleek platform bed in walnut, with matching nightstands, a far cry from the heavy traditional furniture David had insisted suited a house of this caliber. As we were leaving the final store, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. Rebecca Thompson? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Yes? This is Elaine Winters from the Westchester Arts Council. I'm calling because your name was suggested to us by Helen Zhao as a potential board member. We'd love to discuss the possibility with you, if you're interested. I caught Maggie's curious glance as I replied, I'm definitely interested. When? Would you like to meet? After arranging a meeting for the following week, I ended the call, a small smile playing at my lips. What was that about? Maggie asked as we headed toward her car. The Arts Council wants me to join their board. I shook my head slightly, bemused. Helen must have recommended me. That's fantastic, Maggie exclaimed. You've always loved their programs. I have, I agreed. David thought it was frivolous, supporting arts education when there were real problems to solve. We stopped attending their events after the first year we were married. Maggie rolled her eyes. David thought anything that didn't directly benefit David was frivolous. The board position is perfect for you. As we drove back to my house, I found myself mentally rearranging my schedule to accommodate board meetings, fundraisers, gallery openings. All the cultural events I'd gradually set aside as David's career had taken precedence. The possibilities unfurled before me like a map to territory I'd long abandoned. When we reached my house, Maggie helped carry in my purchases before heading home. I spent the evening organizing my closet, removing David's remaining clothes to boxes for donation, rearranging my own garments to occupy the full space. Each item I handled carried memories: the dress I'd worn to his firm's holiday party, the suit I'd bought for client meetings that doubled as attire for his corporate dinners, the casual clothes carefully selected to project successful lawyer's wife during weekend gatherings with his colleagues. I created a separate pile for these items, not for donation, but for consignment. They represented a version of Rebecca Thompson I no longer needed to maintain. In their place, I would build a wardrobe for Rebecca Chen, partner at Bennett & Zhao, board member of the Westchester Arts Council, woman defined by her own choices, rather than her husband's expectations. As I worked, my phone periodically lit up with texts from David, each more frustrated than the last. Rebecca, the buyer needs an answer about the Hamptons house by tomorrow. Call me. This is getting ridiculous. If we lose this deal because you're being stubborn, we'll both regret it. I ignored them all. Whatever financial pressure David was feeling was his problem, not mine. Miles would handle any legitimate business Monday morning. By midnight, my closet was transformed, organized by color and function, with empty spaces waiting to be filled with new selections that reflected my emerging identity. I stood back, surveying my work with satisfaction. It was a small change in the grand scheme of divorce, but it felt significant, a visible representation of reclaiming my space, my choices, my life. As I prepared for bed, one final text arrived from David. "Fine. Have it your way. I've told the buyer we'll have an answer by Wednesday. Just remember that alienating me now only makes this process more difficult for both of us." The thinly veiled threat made me smile. David still believed he held leverage in our dissolution, that I needed his goodwill, his cooperation, his approval. He hadn't yet realized that the power dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted. I no longer required anything from David Thompson, not financially, not emotionally, not socially. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the cards, and unlike David, I knew exactly how to play them. I turned off my phone without responding, settled into bed, and fell into a dreamless, peaceful sleep, the sleep of a woman who knew exactly where she stood and where she was headed. Alone, but increasingly certain that alone was precisely where I needed to be. The partnership announcement went out Monday morning, my name appearing in the company-wide email alongside two other senior managers being elevated to Bennett and Zhao's leadership team. By 9:15, my inbox was flooded with congratulatory messages from colleagues and clients. By 9:30, David had called 3 times. I let each call go to voicemail, focusing instead on preparing for my 10 a.m. meeting with Meridian's executive team. Helen had handled the initial presentation of our findings yesterday, but today we would be discussing remediation strategies, my area of expertise. I reviewed my notes one final time as my assistant, Kevin, appeared in my doorway. "Mr. Thompson on line 2, he announced. "He says it's urgent." I glanced at my watch. "I'm heading into a meeting. Take a message, please." Kevin hesitated. "He's called 4 times in the last hour. Should I tell him you'll call back this afternoon?" "Tell him I'm unavailable and to contact my attorney with any urgent matters." I gathered my materials and stood. "And Kevin, congratulations on your promotion to senior assistant. We'll discuss your new responsibilities tomorrow." The young man's face lit up. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. I won't let you down." I smiled, noting his use of my maiden name, a detail I'd updated in the company directory this morning. Another small reclamation of my identity. The Meridian meeting proceeded smoothly, the executives impressed with our thorough analysis and practical recommendations for preventing future fraud. By lunchtime, we'd secured not only their continued business, but an expanded contract for quarterly compliance reviews, a significant win for the firm and my first major achievement as partner. Helen caught up with me as we left the conference. Excellent work, Rebecca. Jared Spencer was particularly impressed, said he wished he'd had you on his team years ago." "Spencer's team has always been vulnerable to this kind of fraud," I replied. "Their internal controls are outdated. I've recommended a complete overhaul, and he's agreed to it." Helen's smile was satisfied. "That's an additional 2 million in billable hours for the firm." As we walked back to my office, she added casually, "Your ex-husband has been rather persistent this morning. Reception says he's called at least 6 times. "Former husband," I corrected. "The divorce isn't final yet." "Semantics," Helen waved dismissively. "Is there something I should know about? Something that might affect your ability to fulfill your new responsibilities?" I shook my head. "David's having some financial issues and wants to expedite the sale of our Hamptons property. I've directed him to Miles. It won't impact my work." "Good." Helen paused outside my office. "The Hong Kong trip is confirmed for next month. We'll be there for 10 days. I've had my assistant send over the itinerary, your first official trip as partner." After she left, I closed my door and checked my voicemail. 5 messages from David, each more agitated than the last. "Rebecca, we need to discuss the Hampton situation immediately. Call me." "This is ridiculous. I know you're getting these messages. Call me back. Your lawyer is refusing to expedite the approval process. We're going to lose this buyer. You've made your point, whatever it is. This is affecting my financial position. Stop being vindictive. Fine. I'm coming to your office since you won't pick up your damn phone. The last message had been left 40 minutes ago. I immediately called Miles. David's threatening to come to my office, I informed him without preamble. Apparently, you're being unreasonable about the Hamptons property. Miles's dry chuckle came through the line. I simply asked for full disclosure of his current financial situation before approving any sale of marital assets. Patricia had a minor conniption. So he is in financial trouble, I confirmed. It appears so. Something about investment losses and unexpected expenses? Patricia was deliberately vague, which is telling in itself. I considered this information. How should I handle him if he shows up here? Don't engage on specifics. Refer everything to me. And Rebecca? Document any harassment or disruption to your workplace. It could be useful leverage. I'd barely ended the call when Kevin's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Chen, Mr. Thompson is here. He's quite insistent on seeing you. I took a deep breath, straightening my posture. Send him in, Kevin, and please stay near my door. David burst into my office moments later, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened, his face flushed with anger. Finally, he snapped, closing the door behind him. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I remained seated, folding my hands on my desk. Hello, David. I understand. You're upset about the Hamptons property. Upset? You're deliberately sabotaging a time-sensitive deal. The buyer is walking if we don't approve the sale by tomorrow. Then the buyer isn't serious, I replied calmly. Any legitimate purchaser understands that property sales during divorce proceedings require due process. David paced in front of my desk, running a hand through his disheveled hair. This is about punishing me, isn't it? Making me suffer because I hurt you. This is about following proper legal procedure during asset division. Nothing more. He stopped pacing, finally noticing the changes to my office. The new nameplate on my desk reading Rebecca Chen, partner, the rearranged furniture, the absence of our wedding photo from the credenza. Partner? He read, surprised momentarily. Displacing his anger. When did that happen? The announcement went out this morning, though the decision was made last week. He stared at me, processing this information. You never mentioned you were up for partner again? You never asked about my career, David? Not for years. The observation landed like a physical blow. He sank into the visitor's chair, deflated. I need this sale to go through, Rebecca. I'm in a difficult position financially. So I gather. That's why Miles has requested full disclosure of your current financial situation before approving any asset liquidation. That's invasive and unnecessary, he protested. It's standard procedure in divorce cases involving significant assets. Your attorney should have explained that. David's expression hardened. Patricia says you're being deliberately obstructive, that this is emotional rather than practical. Patricia is attempting to circumvent due diligence to serve her clients' interests. Miles is protecting mine. I glanced pointedly at my watch. I have another meeting in 10 minutes. Is there anything else? Yes, there's something else, David said, leaning forward. What happened to you, Rebecca? When did you become this cold? The question, so similar to what he'd asked that night in our kitchen, struck a nerve. I'm not cold, David. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. The Rebecca I married would have worked with me on this, not against me. The Rebecca you married trusted you completely. The woman sitting before you now knows better. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. If you're in financial difficulty, I suggest you disclose the details to Miles so we can find an equitable solution. Now, I really do have a meeting. David rose slowly, studying me with a mixture of frustration and something else, perhaps respect or simply surprise. Congratulations on the partnership, he said finally. You deserve it. The unexpected graciousness caught me off guard. Thank you. He moved toward the door, then paused. I saw the announcement in the Times about you joining the Arts Council board. That's good, Rebecca. You always loved their programs. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of his cologne and a confused tangle of emotions I had no time to unravel. My afternoon progressed with back-to-back meetings, client calls, team briefings, partnership orientation. By 7, when the office had quieted, I finally had a moment to process David's visit. His financial problems were clearly serious if he was willing to appear at my workplace unannounced. Patricia Winters was known for advising clients to maintain absolute separation during divorce proceedings. The fact that she hadn't prevented his visit suggested desperation. I called Miles from my office. David showed up here today, I informed him. He's quite agitated about the Hamptons situation. Did he make a scene? Miles asked, professional interest evident in his tone. No, he was relatively contained once he realized he wasn't getting what he wanted. But he's definitely under significant financial pressure. That's consistent with what I've gathered. Patricia finally sent over some financial disclosures this afternoon. They're incomplete, but revealing nonetheless. How bad is it? Miles paused, considering how much to share. He's overextended. The mortgage on the Hamptons property is underwater. He's carrying significant credit card debt. And there's evidence of regular cash withdrawals far exceeding his normal spending patterns. Jennifer, I surmised. Most likely. The withdrawals coincide with the timeline of their relationship, but there's something else. Something they're not disclosing. This level of financial distress doesn't align with his income and known expenses. I considered this, mentally reviewing what I knew of David's finances. Check for investment losses. David was always overconfident about his market insights, already investigating that angle. In the meantime, how do you want to proceed with the Hamptons property? I thought about David's strained appearance, his uncharacteristic visit to my office, his surprising congeniality at the end. Let's allow the sale, but with conditions. I want 50% of the proceeds held in escrow until the divorce is finalized. And I want complete transparency on his finances before we proceed further. That's generous, Rebecca. We could potentially leverage this situation for more favorable terms overall. I'm not interested in punishing him, Miles. I want what's fair, nothing more. After ending the call, I gathered my things and prepared to leave. Kevin had long since departed, the office floor nearly empty except for a few associates working late on urgent matters. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. Saw the partnership announcement online. Champagne. Tonight, I smiled, typing back. Rain check? It's been a long day. Breakfast tomorrow? Fine, but we're having mimosas. Clark's at 7? Perfect. The elevator arrived, empty at this hour. As I descended to the lobby, I reflected on how differently this day had unfolded compared to my expectations. The partnership announcement, David's unexpected appearance, the revelations about his finances, each development shifting the landscape of my new reality in subtle but significant ways. Outside, the September evening was pleasantly cool, the sky darkening toward night. Instead of heading directly to my car, I walked to the small park across from our building, finding an empty bench with a view of the illuminated fountain. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to simply sit and breathe. No agenda, no strategy, no calculations. David's question echoed in my mind. What happened to you, Rebecca? The answer was both simple and infinitely complex. I'd changed because I'd had to, because the foundation of my life had shifted, forcing me to either adapt or collapse. The Rebecca who had trusted implicitly, who had accommodated and adjusted, and diminished to fit within the parameters of David's life, was indeed gone. In her place was someone more self-protective, more assertive, more thoroughly herself. Was that coldness, as David suggested, or merely self-preservation? My phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Miles. He'd drafted a proposed agreement for the Hamptons property sale, incorporating my conditions. It was fair, even generous given David's betrayal. I approved it with a quick reply, then put my phone away, returning my attention to the fountain. Water arced through the air, catching light, falling in predictable patterns. There was comfort in that predictability, in knowing exactly how the physical world would behave according to unchangeable laws. People were messier, their motivations and actions less predictable, their impacts more profound. I thought of Jennifer, of her audacious email and text message. What was she seeking from me? Absolution? Understanding? Or merely the upper hand in a triangle I hadn't asked to be part of? Whatever her motivation, she remained an abstraction. To me, a catalyst for change rather than a fully realized adversary. The real struggle wasn't with Jennifer. It was with the version of myself I'd allowed to develop during my marriage. Compliant, supportive to a fault, secondary. That Rebecca had served her purpose, enabling the life we'd built together. But that life was over now, and so was her utility. As darkness settled fully around me, I finally rose and headed toward my car. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The breakfast with Maggie, the team I needed to build as partner, the continuing negotiation of my divorce. But tonight, sitting alone with my thoughts, I'd achieved a moment of clarity about the woman I was becoming. Not cold, determined, not closed, selective, not bitter. Wiser. The Rebecca who drove home that night was a woman still in transition, still discovering the parameters of her new existence. But she was moving forward, one decision at a time, toward a future entirely of her own design. The next morning, I arrived at Clark's precisely at 7, wearing a new outfit from my weekend shopping expedition, a burgundy silk blouse beneath a tailored charcoal blazer, paired with sleek black trousers. Professional, but with a boldness David would have deemed inappropriate for client meetings. Maggie was already seated, 2 mimosas waiting on the table. She whistled softly as I approached. Look at partner Chen making an entrance. Love the blouse, I slid into the booth opposite her. Too much for a Tuesday? Not even close. It's perfect. She raised her glass. To my brilliant friend, finally getting the recognition she deserves. And to David Thompson eating his heart out when he realizes exactly what he gave up. I clinked my glass against hers, taking a small sip. He came to my office yesterday. Maggie nearly choked on her drink. What? Why? I explained the situation, with the Hamptons property, David's financial difficulties, and his unexpected appearance at Bennett and Zhao. So he's broke and desperate, Maggie summarized with evident satisfaction. Karma's working overtime. Not broke, I corrected. Overextended. There's a difference. Still, it couldn't happen to a more deserving guy. Maggie buttered a piece of toast. Are you going to let him sell the house? Yes, with conditions. I'm not interested in watching him financially self-destruct, Maggie. It doesn't benefit me. In any way. She studied me over the rim of her glass. You're being remarkably mature about all this. What's the alternative? Vindictiveness? Drawing out the divorce to inflict maximum pain? That would hurt me as much as him. I suppose. She sounded almost disappointed, but a little schadenfreude would be understandable. I smiled despite myself. Oh, I didn't say I wasn't enjoying his predicament, just that I won't actively contribute to it. Maggie laughed, then grew more serious. How are you really doing with all this, Beck? The partnership, the divorce, everything changing at once? I considered the question carefully. I'm surprisingly okay. Busy, of course, but that helps. And I'm discovering that there are parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. Interests and Ambitions I'd set aside for the sake of our marriage. Like the Arts Council board. Exactly. And small things too. Choosing furniture I actually like, planning a trip without considering someone else's schedule, even deciding what to have for dinner based solely on my own preferences. The waiter arrived with our breakfast: egg white, omelet for me, Belgian waffles for Maggie. After he left, she leaned forward conspiratorially. "Have you thought about dating yet?" The question caught me off guard. Dating? Maggie, my divorce isn't even finalized. So? David moved on before the marriage was over. Why shouldn't you explore your options? I shook my head firmly. I'm not ready for that. Besides, I'm enjoying my independence. The last thing I need is to launch into another relationship before I've fully processed the end of my marriage. Fair enough, Maggie conceded. But when you are ready, promise you'll let me set you up with Eric from my office. He's brilliant, gorgeous, and recently single. I'll take it under advisement, I replied dryly, turning my attention to my omelet. We finished breakfast discussing lighter topics: Maggie's latest dating disaster, plans for the upcoming charity gala, her brother's new baby. It felt normal, comfortable, a reminder that some relationships remained constant even as others dissolved. As we walked to our respective cars, Maggie hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, Beck. Not everyone would handle this situation with such grace. I'm not sure grace is the right word, I admitted. More like strategic coping. Call it whatever you want. You're doing great. She pulled back, studying my face. Just don't forget to feel things occasionally, okay? Even the bad emotions need processing. I promised to try, then headed to the office, where my day quickly filled with the demands of partnership. Client meetings, strategy sessions, personnel decisions. The constant flow of responsibility left little time for personal reflection. Late that afternoon, Miles called with an update. Patricia accepted. Our terms for the Hamptons property. The sale can proceed with 50% of proceeds held in escrow. Good. Has David provided the additional financial disclosures we requested? Partially. There's still something they're hiding, but we've uncovered most of it ourselves. As you suspected, he made some spectacularly bad investment choices last year, a tech startup that failed spectacularly, plus some ill-advised options trading. Combined losses approaching 7 figures. I winced. Those were significant sums, even for someone with David's income. No wonder he's desperate to sell the Hamptons house. Indeed. There's more, though. He's been paying Jennifer's rent for an apartment that costs nearly twice what you estimated. Plus regular gifts, weekends away, the usual courtship expenses. For a man trying to impress a much younger woman. The image of David lavishing gifts on Jennifer while simultaneously lying to me about late nights at the office sent a sudden flare of anger through me. The first pure, uncomplicated emotion I'd allowed myself in weeks. Rebecca, are you still there? Miles asked after my prolonged silence. Yes, I managed, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Is there anything else I should know? Just one thing. Jennifer Ames quit her position at Kleiner and Associates last week. Apparently, the situation became uncomfortable after your confrontation with David. This genuinely surprised me. She quit? Where is she working now? That's the interesting part. She's not. According to our sources, she's moved in with David and isn't currently employed. I absorbed this information, its implications unfolding, in my mind. David, already financially stressed, had now taken on full support of his girlfriend. The apartment in Chelsea would likely be vacated soon if it hadn't been already. Jennifer, having sacrificed her job for their relationship, would be entirely dependent on David, a situation that would add immeasurable pressure to an already strained scenario. Rebecca? Miles prompted. How would you like to proceed? I considered the question, weighing options and outcomes with the same analytical precision I applied to client problems. Continue as planned. The fair division of assets, nothing more, nothing less. David's financial choices are his own concern now. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair, allowing myself to fully feel the anger that had flared earlier. It wasn't just about the money, though the thought of David splurging on Jennifer while I managed our household budget with careful attention was certainly galling. It was the sheer audacity of maintaining two separate lives, playing the devoted husband at home while building a parallel existence with another woman. For the first time, I let myself imagine them together. David introducing Jennifer to his colleagues, taking her to restaurants we'd frequented, perhaps even bringing her to the Hamptons house we'd purchased together. The mental images stung, but less sharply than I'd anticipated. The pain was more about betrayal of trust than loss of love, I realized. The David I'd believed in had never truly existed. A knock at my door interrupted these thoughts. Kevin appeared, holding a large arrangement of flowers. "These just arrived for you, Ms. Chen." I stared at the elaborate bouquet of lilies and orchids, my favorites, though few people knew that. "Thank you, Kevin. Is there a card?" He handed me a small envelope before discreetly withdrawing. I opened it with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Congratulations on the partnership and board appointment. Both long overdue. Dinner soon to celebrate? David." The presumption was breathtaking. After showing up unannounced at my office after months of deception, after moving his girlfriend into his new place, he thought flowers and a congratulatory note would— What? Open a door to reconciliation? Establish a friendly post-marriage relationship? Ease his guilt? I placed the card on my desk, considering my response. The old Rebecca might have accepted the gesture at face value, might have been flattered by the attention, might have agreed to dinner to maintain harmony. The woman I was becoming recognized it for what it was, an attempt to manage my perception of him, to mitigate potential damage as our divorce proceeded. I picked up my phone and texted a simple response. "Thank you for the flowers. Please communicate through Miles going forward." Then I called Kevin. "Would you mind taking these flowers to the reception area? They're lovely, but I'm slightly allergic." The lie came easily, a small act of self-protection. I had no allergy, but I had no interest in looking at David's manipulative gift for the rest of the day. By the time I left the office that evening, I'd fully processed my anger, examined it from all angles, and filed it away with the growing collection of emotions surrounding my divorce. Not forgotten, but contained. Fuel. For forward movement rather than an obstacle to progress. The week progressed in a blur of activity. Each day brought new partnership responsibilities, meetings with the Arts Council about upcoming initiatives, and updates from Miles about the divorce proceedings. The Hamptons house sold quickly once the approval was granted, the proceeds divided, as agreed, with David's portion clearly alleviating some of his immediate financial pressure. On Friday afternoon, as I was preparing to leave for the weekend, Helen stopped by my office. "The Hong Kong itinerary is finalized," she announced, placing a folder on my desk. "We leave in 3 weeks. I've added meetings with potential clients in Singapore as well. Your father's connections might be useful there." I nodded, glancing at the schedule. "I'll call him this weekend, see if he can arrange introductions." Helen studied me with her characteristic directness. "How are things progressing with the divorce?" "Smoothly enough. The property division is nearly complete. No significant disputes remaining." "Good." She hesitated, then added, "The charity gala is tomorrow night, correct? The one for the Arts Council?" "Yes, my first official appearance as a board member." "Will you be attending alone?" The question, gentle but pointed, caught me slightly off guard. "Yes, I will. Is that a problem?" Helen smiled. "Not at all. I was simply going to suggest that if you wanted company, my nephew Michael is in town. He's an architect, recently divorced himself, and an excellent conversationalist. Are you trying to set me up, Helen? I asked, unable to hide my surprise. Merely offering options, Rebecca. Attending such events alone can be challenging during this transitional period. She moved toward the door. He'll be at my table tomorrow night. No pressure, but the option is there if you'd like an ally in the room. After she left, I sat contemplating her suggestion. The gala would indeed be my first major social appearance since the separation, an event where I'd inevitably face questions about David's absence, where I'd navigate the curious glances and whispered speculations of Manhattan's charity circuit. Having a companion, even a casual one, would certainly deflect some of that attention. And yet, the thought of attending with a stranger, of creating even the appearance of moving on so quickly, felt uncomfortable. I closed my laptop and gathered my things decision made. I would attend alone, head held high, answering questions directly but briefly. My marital status was changing, but my professional standing and community involvement were only strengthening. That would be my focus tomorrow night. At home, I spent the evening reviewing the Arts Council materials, familiarizing myself with current programs and funding priorities. Around 9, my phone rang with my parents' international number. Rebecca, my father's voice came through clearly despite the distance. Your mother and I just saw the partnership announcement. Congratulations, daughter. Thank you, Baba. The familiar Mandarin term slipped out automatically, a remnant of my childhood. It's been a busy few weeks? So we gather. Helen mentioned you're joining her in Hong Kong next month. Of course, Helen had already spoken to my father. Their friendship preceded my birth, their business connections interwoven through decades of collaboration. Yes, I'll be leading the Asian Division review. We might add some client meetings in Singapore as well. Good. You'll stay with us while you're there. It wasn't a question. Your mother is looking forward to seeing you. I hesitated, then decided directness was best. Baba, there's something you and Mom should know. David and I are divorcing. A long pause followed. When my father spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. I see. May I ask why? He's been having an affair. For 6 months. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear my father relaying the information to my mother in rapid Mandarin, her exclamation of dismay in the background. Your mother wants to know if you're all right, he said finally. I'm fine. Better than expected, actually. The partnership, the Arts Council board. I'm focusing on rebuilding my professional life. As you should. My father's voice held approval. And the house? The finances? Being handled appropriately. Miles Hoffman is representing me. Excellent choice. He cleared his throat. Your mother wants to speak with you. My mother's voice, warm and concerned, flowed through the line. Rebecca, why didn't you tell us sooner? We would have come immediately. There was nothing you could do, Mom, and I needed to handle this my way. You sound different, stronger. I am stronger. The realization settled over me with quiet certainty. This situation has forced me to be. We spoke for another 20 minutes, my mother extracting promises that I would visit them in Singapore after the Hong Kong meetings, my father offering business connections and legal resources despite my assurances that everything was under control. When we finally said goodbye, I felt a familiar mixture of comfort and pressure that came with my parents' attention. Their boundless support, coupled with expectations of excellence I'd internalized long ago. Saturday arrived with perfect early autumn weather, clear skies, gentle breeze, temperature ideal for the sleeveless black gown I'd selected for the evening's gala. I spent the morning at the farmer's market, purchasing fresh flowers and produce with no consideration for anyone's preferences but my own. The simple pleasure of selecting a ripe peach because I wanted it, not because it was on a shared shopping list, still felt novel. In the afternoon, I indulged in a spa appointment, facial, manicure, hairstyled in an elegant updo that felt appropriately festive for the evening ahead. The stylist, noticing my bare ring finger, asked if I was attending a special event. A charity gala, I replied simply. For the Arts Council. Date night? She inquired with professional cheerfulness. No, just me. I met her eyes in the mirror, my tone pleasant but final. She nodded, understanding the boundary, and focused on completing my hair without further personal questions. By 7, I was dressed and ready, the black gown complemented by diamond drop earrings and a simple platinum bracelet. The woman in the mirror looked poised, confident, perhaps even beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards, and everything to do with the calm assurance in her eyes. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum. The Temple of Dender transformed into a glittering wonderland of lights, flowers, and New York's philanthropic elite. As my car pulled up to the entrance, I took a deep breath, preparing for my first major social appearance as a single woman after a decade of attending such events as part of a couple. The red carpet was lined with photographers documenting arrivals, for society pages and charity publications. I walked it alone, smiling politely, answering the occasional question about the Arts Council's initiatives, moving with measured confidence toward the main entrance. Inside, the space hummed with conversation and laughter, instrumental music floating above the social buzz. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began making my way toward the Arts Council tables, stopping occasionally to greet acquaintances and colleagues. Rebecca? Darling, you look stunning. Elaine Winters, the council director, who had recruited me, appeared at my elbow. Come, let me introduce you to some of our major donors. For the next half hour, I circulated with Elaine, discussing educational programs and community outreach with potential benefactors, my professional background proving useful in addressing questions about fiscal responsibility and program metrics. Eventually, I made my way to my assigned table, finding Helen already seated with several people I recognized from previous charity events. The empty chair beside her was presumably for her nephew, who had not yet arrived. Rebecca, Helen greeted me warmly. You remember Judge Thornton and his wife, Marion? And of course Derek and Sophia Chen from the Metropolitan Opera Board. I exchanged pleasantries with each couple, fielding the inevitable question about David, with practiced ease. He couldn't be here tonight. We're actually separated, moving toward divorce. Their expressions of sympathy were genuine, if slightly curious. Judge Thornton's wife squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry, dear. These things are never easy. I nodded acknowledgement, then deftly turned the conversation to the Arts Council's latest initiative supporting music education in underserved schools, a topic that particularly engaged Sophia Chen, herself a former concert pianist. As dinner service began, the seat beside Helen remained empty. She leaned toward me apologetically. Michael sends his regrets. Apparently there's a crisis with one of his projects in Boston. He had to fly up this afternoon. No worries, I assured her. I'm perfectly comfortable on my own. The meal progressed pleasantly, the conversation flowing between arts funding, city politics, and benign gossip about mutual acquaintances. I was in the middle of explaining our board's 5-year strategic plan to Judge Thornton when a familiar figure appeared at the edge of my vision, moving through the crowded room with purposeful strides. David, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair freshly cut, looking every inch the successful attorney. And beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, was a slender blonde woman I recognized immediately from the company website photos. Jennifer Ames, wearing a pale blue gown that emphasized both her youth and her beauty. My sentence faltered momentarily before I recovered, finishing my thought with only the slightest hesitation. Helen, following my gaze, stiffened almost imperceptibly beside me. Rebecca, she murmured, we can have security escort them out. They shouldn't be here. I shook my head slightly. It's a public charity event, Helen. They have every right to attend. Even so, the audacity is entirely in character, I finished for her, keeping my voice low. It's fine. Really. But it wasn't fine, not entirely. The sight of them together, David guiding Jennifer through the room with the same attentive gesture he'd once used with me, introducing her to colleagues and friends who had attended our wedding, sent an unexpected jolt of emotion through me. Not jealousy exactly, but something adjacent to it. A visceral reaction to seeing my replacement so publicly displayed. I forced my attention back to the table, rejoining the conversation with deliberate focus. For the next 20 minutes, I maintained my composure through sheer will, laughing at Judge Thornton's anecdotes, discussing next season's opera lineup with Sophia, all while acutely aware of David and Jennifer circulating through the room. When the dancing began after dinner, I excused myself to visit the ladies' room, needing a moment of privacy to gather my thoughts. In the elegant marble washroom, I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection for signs of the turmoil I felt internally. There were none. My makeup remained perfect, my expression composed, my posture straight. Only I could feel the rapid beating of my heart, the slight tremor in my hands as I reapplied my lipstick. He's an idiot, you know. I turned to find Marian Thornton entering the restroom, her kind eyes meeting mine in the mirror. I beg your pardon? Your husband, soon-to-be ex? I should say, bringing that girl here to an event where he knew you'd be present and so soon after your separation? She shook her head. Complete idiot. I smiled despite myself. You've known David for years. You can't be entirely surprised. Oh, but I am, she countered, moving to stand beside me at the mirror. Not by the affair. Men in positions of power have predictable weaknesses, but by his handling of the aftermath. David always struck me as politically astute, if nothing else. This display shows remarkably poor judgment. Her frank assessment was oddly comforting. They seem to think they're in love, I offered, surprising myself with the admission. Marian snorted delicately. Of course they do. He's enamored with her youth and admiration. She's captivated by his status and security. Tale as old as time. Marian adjusted her elegant updo, then turned to face me directly. The question isn't what they think they have. It's what you know you deserve. I considered her words, feeling something settle within me. Thank you, Marian. I needed that perspective. Any time, dear. Now, shall we return? I believe they're announcing the fundraising total soon. We walked back to the ballroom together, my confidence restored. As we approached our table, I noticed David watching me from across the room, his expression unreadable. Jennifer stood beside him, speaking animatedly to an older couple I recognized as senior partners from his firm, but David's attention remained fixed on me. I nodded politely in his direction before taking my seat, my acknowledgement brief but civil. He seemed momentarily startled by the gesture, perhaps expecting coldness or avoidance. The gala continued with speeches and recognition of major donors. I focused on the stage, applauding appropriately, contributing to table conversation when required. Only once did I glance in David's direction, finding him still watching me with an intensity that might have unsettled me weeks earlier. Now, it merely registered as an observation, like noting changes in weather. When the formal program concluded, guests began circulating again. I excused myself from the table to speak with a potential Arts Council donor Helen had pointed out. As I moved through the crowd, I felt a presence at my elbow. Rebecca. David's voice, so familiar yet suddenly strange, stopped me. I turned, maintaining a polite smile. David, I didn't expect to see you here. Clearly. His eyes scanned my face, searching for something. You look different. It's been a month, I replied simply. No, it's more than that. He seemed genuinely perplexed. You seem happy? I suggested. He blinked, startled by the... Or are you? The question deserved honest consideration. Was I happy? Not entirely, not yet. But I was something equally valuable. I'm becoming myself again, I said finally. It's a good process. David glanced toward Jennifer, who was watching us from a distance, her expression guarded. I hear congratulations are in order. Partnership, Arts Council Board. You're having quite a month. I'm making changes that were long overdue, including the house. I drove by yesterday, saw the landscapers tearing out all the boxwoods. I nodded. I'm replacing them with flowering shrubs, something with more color. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken recognitions. David broke it first. Thank you for approving the Hampton sale. It helped. Miles mentioned you're having financial difficulties. He stiffened slightly. Temporary setbacks, nothing serious. If you say so. I glanced at my watch. I should get back to my table. Elaine wants to introduce me to some foundation representatives. David reached out, his hand stopping just short of touching my arm. Could we meet sometime? Just to talk? There are things I need to say to you. I studied him carefully, noting the shadows under his eyes, the slight strain around his mouth, the earnestness that seemed genuine despite everything. I don't think that's necessary, David. We've said what needed saying. Have we? His voice lowered. Because I haven't told you that I made the biggest mistake of my life, that I wake up every morning regretting what I threw away. That seeing you tonight, confident, beautiful, thriving without me, is both wonderful and excruciating. The confession hung between us, surprising in its rawness. For a moment, I glimpsed the David I'd first fallen in love with. Vulnerable, sincere, capable of genuine emotion beneath the polished exterior. I'm sorry you're struggling, I said finally, but your regrets are yours to manage, just as your choices were yours to make. His shoulders sagged slightly. I deserve that. It's not about what you deserve, David. It's about what's true. I stepped back, creating distance. I wish you well, truly. I hope you find happiness with Jennifer. But our chapter is ending, and we both need to accept that. And if I can't? The question was quiet, almost desperate. You will, I assured him. Because you have no choice, just as I had no choice but to rebuild when you shattered what we had. From across the room, I saw Helen watching our interaction with concern. I gave her a slight nod to indicate I was fine. Goodbye, David. I need to go. As I walked away, I felt him watching me, felt the weight of his regret like a tangible thing. But it no longer had the power to pull me backward. I'd moved beyond the gravity of our failed marriage into an orbit entirely my own. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. I did not see David and Jennifer leave, but at some point, I noticed their absence, a small relief in an otherwise demanding social performance. By midnight, as the gala wound down, I found myself genuinely tired but satisfied. The event had raised record funds for arts education programs. I'd connected with key donors who expressed interest in our initiatives, and I'd faced the unexpected appearance of David and Jennifer with a composure that surprised even me. Helen joined me as I waited for the valet to bring my car. You handled that admirably, she said without preamble. David's appearance was completely inappropriate. It was unexpected, I conceded. But perhaps necessary. She raised an eyebrow questioningly. Seeing them together in public, it made everything real in a way that legal documents haven't? I smiled faintly. And realizing I could face that without falling apart, it was confirming. Of what? That I'm going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. The valet arrived with my car. Helen squeezed my arm gently before stepping back. You already are, Rebecca. You already are. The drive home was peaceful, the late-night streets nearly empty. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the newly planted flowering shrubs along the front walk, their shapes barely visible in the darkness. but promising vibrant colors when spring arrived. Inside, the house welcomed me with familiar silence. I removed my jewelry and gown, changed into comfortable sleepwear, and completed my nighttime routine. Only then, sitting on the edge of my new bed in my redesigned bedroom, did I let myself fully process the evening's encounter. David regretted his choice. The knowledge should have been vindicating, perhaps even satisfying. Instead, it felt simply factual, a piece of information to acknowledge and file away, relevant but not determinative. His regret was not my responsibility. His happiness was not my concern. His future was no longer intertwined with mine. What mattered now was the life I was building, the partnership at Bennett & Zhao, the Arts Council position, the international trip ahead, the home I was reclaiming, inch by inch, the friends who had stood by me, the family waiting to welcome me in Singapore, the professional colleagues who valued my expertise rather than my status as someone's wife. As I slipped between the sheets, I realized I hadn't once cried about the divorce in weeks. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something else, a kind of bittersweet wisdom about the impermanence of things once thought solid, the surprising strength found in rebuilding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: partnership duties, divorce proceedings, continued renovations, plans for Hong Kong. But for the first time since David's confession at Le Bernardin, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future stretching before me, a future shaped by my choices, my values, my vision. David had left me for his secretary, believing he was trading up for something better, something easier, something more exciting. In doing so, he had inadvertently given me the push I needed to reclaim parts of myself I'd gradually surrendered during our marriage. 1 month later, seeing me at the gala, confident, purposeful, surrounded by accomplished people who respected me for myself, he had recognized his catastrophic miscalculation, but his revelation came too late. The woman he regretted losing no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer, and infinitely more certain of her worth. As sleep claimed me, one final thought drifted through my mind. Sometimes, the greatest gift an unfaithful partner can give you is the opportunity to rediscover who you were always meant to be. In the morning, I would continue becoming exactly that person, not out of spite or revenge, but because it was, quite simply, the most satisfying path forward. David Thompson had left. Rebecca Chen had arrived, and she was magnificent. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.